What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and this bumper is to let you guys know that we are having a Super Smash Brothers tournament this weekend on Saturday on the Discord server. If you guys don't know about it, I have a Discord server for all the Comics Explained fans. We have quizzes, we have all kinds of tournaments, games, things for you guys to do, and once every month, we actually have a kind of versus battle of sorts where we give away a Rob Core ring. So if you guys want to be a part of that, make sure you guys check the link down in the description. It'll be a permanent link to the Discord server, so you'll always have access. And yeah, hopefully I'll see you there. Let's begin. Okay, so a lot of you guys have been asking my opinion on Justice League Dark Apokolips War. And to be honest with you guys, I did not initially see it when it dropped, right? I mean, as far as I'm aware, I think it dropped at the beginning of May. I didn't see it until last night. And a lot of you guys have been asking about it, so I was like, okay. So I sat down with Mariah, she and I checked it out. And here's the thing, we loved it, right? Like, we loved it. And here's the funny thing about it, and this is what I don't really understand, right? I mean, I've noticed in recent years that Warner Brothers Animation has kind of been ticking up on the number of animated films they've been releasing, but it's one of these things where like Warner Brothers seems to put a lot more emphasis behind their extended universe, right? Their live action films than they do their animated films. And it's kind of a shame because every animated film they've made has been better than their live action films. Like, that'd be my emphasis, right? That'd be my decision. Like, I would focus on the animated side, you know, like I would focus on like these animated movies and just create a cohesive universe out of that, right? I mean, people, you know, will say things like, well, it's a cartoon, so it can't really be taken as serious or anything like that. But like, we just spent 10 years watching a movie about a guy who was frozen in ice for 70 years coming back, a god who eats apples and basically keeps himself essentially immortal, a scientist who turns into a giant green rage monster, and an archer who was somehow able to fight like a god deity kind of guy, right? Like a demigod. So like, we're way beyond the point where anybody can make an argument of saying that like it would be too cartoony, right? Like that's kind of nonsense. But you know, the movie was absolutely fantastic. It was amazing. And you know what it reminds me of? You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of Days of Future Past. That's how it felt. Right? It felt like Justice League Days of Future Past. Now, as far as I'm aware, and this is kind of the cool thing, right? So spoilers, you know, going forward for you know, the movie, if you haven't seen it, you know, this looks like it takes place basically in the future of the Flashpoint universe, right? Because from what we saw, like Flashpoint happened, right? You have like John Constantine, you know, who basically uses his powers on Barry and then realizes that Barry caused Flashpoint, right? And then Barry goes back and basically undoes Flashpoint in order to keep this from happening, right? So it's like the finality of the Flashpoint universe, which is cool. You know, it's cool. We'll get to that here in a second. But the funny thing is that the movie picks up, right, with this idea that like Darkseid's basically launched an invasion against Earth twice. We've seen that play out, you know, in different circumstances. And so it's this idea that basically the Justice League is kind of going on the defensive, right? That Darkseid just kind of like popped in, released some drones, and then popped out with the intention of basically reconning the area and then launching an attack, right? You know, it was kind of viewed as a prelude to an attack. And so then you basically go into the Justice League launching their strike. Now, this was a little bit disappointing to me because what I was hoping is we would see this full-on fight. Instead, you have the Justice League that shows up to Apokolips, are immediately attacked by parademons, and then you just pick up 2 years later. And it's like, okay. So like, I don't know how I feel about that, right? I don't know how I feel about that whole thing. But you know, whatever. We kind of get flashbacks and we get the full explanation of what goes on. It was one of the coolest things about this, and it's what I loved about it. Like, it's not one of these things where like everybody lives happily ever after, right? Like, they make it out by the skin of their teeth, but they make it out. Like, Superman gets injected with liquid kryptonite, so he loses his powers. Batman is put in the Mobius chair by Darkseid, which is kind of cool to see them revamp it. But basically, he's kind of turned into like this Injustice Batman from like if Superman just kind of continued on and then won, where he's basically mind controlled by Darkseid. You've got Cyborg, who's the whole reason why the plan failed, because Darkseid was spying on the Justice League through him and knew exactly what their plan was going to be by the time they got there. And he's basically turned into like the Source Wall, more or less, is, you know, for Apokolips anyway, is kind of how it's explained. I'm still a little murky on the role that he played. You got Martian Manhunter, you've got Hawkman, and you've got Queen Mara, who are basically turned into Furies alongside Wonder Woman, who leads them all, which, can we just admit, Wonder Woman as a Fury facing off against Etrigan was amazing. It was like the coolest thing ever, right? There were some amazing moments in this movie. One of the things that I really wish we could have seen, and we didn't get to see it, but one of the things that I really wish we we could have seen was the actual fight between Darkseid and what was left of the Green Lanterns, right? Because we only got a couple of them. We got like Kilowog, who died like that. We got, you know, a few others here and there, like Jon Stewart gets incinerated. He had a really epic moment, but it would have been cool to actually see Darkseid fight like the Guardians of the Universe, right? And like overtake them. That would have been awesome to see. I feel like that was a missed opportunity, but at the same time, if for no other reason than pacing, it probably just didn't work, right? It probably just didn't really fit in too well. But I think it would have really solidified like what the Justice League was facing off against, right? Because the reality is that looking at the movie, looking at how they all failed, it didn't really look like they failed because of just the power of Darkseid. It looked like they failed because Darkseid knew what their plan was, right? So it was just ingenuity and good thinking on his part is really all it was, as opposed to like Darkseid being presented as this almost just like intimidating, you know, unstoppable, immutable force of like evil with that throughout the entirety of all existence, right? Throughout the entirety of the multiverse. I think that came into play later on with Trigon, but it was cool, right? Because you get things like Damian's leading the League of Shadows now, and like Nightwing, like he tried to resurrect Nightwing through the Lazarus pits, and Nightwing was just permanently insane. Like you got these really awesome things, but that's kind of what I loved, is like it just felt, it lived up to its name, right? Justice League Dark. The movie felt dark. It felt like a worst case scenario, to be honest with you guys, and that's why I say it felt like Days of Future Past, because, you know, kind of a sidetrack here, at the time that X-Men Days of Future Past was released, right, Uncanny X-Men 141 and 142, you had some comics that kind of led up to that, but that was the worst case scenario for the X-Men. And in the X-Men's comics, and even within Marvel as a larger entity, we'd never really seen anything like that, right? Where like some force popped up and basically killed or enslaved all the superheroes and supervillains and all those with powers and even humans across North America. We'd never really seen that before. And so it was pretty like mind-boggling to see just how bad things were for everybody in that story. And with this film, it felt so much like that, right? And one of the coolest things about this was the character of Raven. Right? I loved the way they played with Raven, because my initial thought, because you kind of had this like tug, right? You basically got Raven, who's got Trigon locked away, and it's one of these things where Trigon is always trying to escape, but as the movie starts to get towards its end, it's almost like Trigon's on her side, right? Like the point where they're in Apokolips, you know, and they're being hit by like all these lasers and things like that, and you know, so on, and Trigon's just let go, like, trust me, I will make sure you survive. And then he does, like, right, like he basically saves her. She channels the power of Trigon, he saves her and everybody else there, and then she goes back to her normal self. And like, that was cool to see. That was a really cool thing. I did like the romance between Raven and Damian. The issue with that, and I think that's one of the things that you kind of ran into with the issues of Damian in the movie, is the things that you saw with his character only really resonated if you were a fan of Damian Wayne, right? Like if you've been reading DC Comics, if you read Grant Morrison's run and you read like Batman and Son or something like that, Batman and Robin, different things like that, you know, where you had like these stories of Damian in the Bat family, then like the movie rings, it really changes the way you see Damian, especially when he jumps in the way of Darkseid's Omega Beams and then dies, or presumably seems to die for Batman. Of course, he didn't die, he was just aged up or something like that, and then, you know, it was you know, and we'll talk about what happened next here in a minute, but it's interesting. Damian was one of those things where it seemed Warner Brothers Animation was really kind of relying on, one, that you knew he was Batman's son, which they also kind of reiterated that, but then two, you understood the relationship between the two of them. They did a pretty good job of saying things like, well, you know, he you know, like Batman saying like, you were a mistake and your mom drugged me in order to have you, and, or, you know, and all that kind of stuff. But like a lot of that's more impactful if you're familiar with the comic books. And so I wouldn't go as far as to say they could have done a better job in how they handled Damian. They did great. It's just that the impact and the significance of his character, it hits you harder if you read the comics, right? So watching how everybody felt, right? Like Starfire being a Fury, like the Teen Titans were just almost totally obliterated, right? Like Superboy, basically, like he barely made it out by the skin of his teeth. It's never really explained, I don't think, if it's Connor Kent or Jonathan Kent. I'd like to believe it's Jonathan, right? Because I feel like it makes the stakes of Superboy surviving even more important, because I love the character of Jonathan as opposed to, you know, the character of Connor. I didn't grow up with Young Justice, so I was never really a Connor Kent fan. The fact that Superboy ends up biting the bullet later on anyway, you know, is one of those, you know, one of those things. But still, you know, it was cool. But for the character of Raven, you know, her kind of doing her thing, and, you know, and constantly struggling to keep Trigon at bay, I think was a really good way to eliminate the MacGuffin of like, well, just have Raven fix it because she channels the power of a god, so like she can just solve everything. I think it was a great way to nip that in the bud, right? For anybody who would go into it asking the question, well, just let Raven's demigod powers save the day, to immediately take that out of the equation and say, yeah, but if she cuts loose, Trigon breaks free, he'll kill Damien and destroy the world, right? So it's like, okay, so like we kind of have to keep that whole thing going. If I'm being honest with you guys, the standout star of the whole movie, it wasn't Superman or any of those guys. The standout star, John Constantine. He was amazing in this movie. It's crazy how good his character is. And here's the funny thing, I'm more of a fan of Constantine now than I've ever been after seeing this movie, because like the struggle his character goes through is awesome, because after that great big huge event that went on with like the defeat of the Justice League and all that kind of stuff, like it was one of these things where he was depicted as a coward, because when you've got him and Zatanna as a couple, and Zatanna is like overtaken by all these you know, these parademons, which turn out to basically just be like Doomsdays, who've just been created by Darkseid, and apparently the Doomsday that killed Superman was created by Darkseid, and then turned into parademons at the same time. When she's like overtaken by all these paradooms, as they called them, and then like she's basically killed off, it's this thing where like Constantine just runs, and it's just like, okay, so like that plays perfectly into the nature of Constantine, right? Like he's not a fighter, he's a thinker, right? Like he'll fight if he has to, but like he goes and usually does his own thing, and Constantine only really cares about himself. And so that fit in perfect, because you looked at that and my thought was, okay, it seems a little shifty that he would just bail like that, but it also sounds like something Constantine would do, right? Like the whole scenario, like the whole context was he was scared, right? And Constantine doesn't usually ever get shaken or rattled like that, at least not that I'm aware of. But then you end up finding out later on that Zatanna was the one who did that, right? Zatanna was the one who basically cast a kind of spell that sent him running, right? That basically made him leave, and he didn't know that was the case, that she kind of manipulated him, you know, the entire way, because she knew how important he was going to be later on down the road, but also loved him, right? And wanted to make sure that he lived. And so he does prove to be probably the most important person in the entirety of the film, right? He's basically the one with the plan. He's the one that kind of saves the day, all that sort of good stuff, right? But there were some other really good things too, right? Like the Suicide Squad. Harley Quinn's Suicide Squad was amazing. And I'm so glad to see that they didn't pull any punches, right? Like they were brutal. You had King Shark, who's just eating people. Like there's one scene when they're fighting in the prison, he bites their heads off. Like you literally see him bite a guy's head off, right? Like, you know, when they're like, we need to take this truck, and like he just rips them apart and there's just blood going everywhere. It was cool to see that, right? Like the Suicide Squad in that movie, I want to see that. I want to see more of that Suicide Squad. It was great. Like it was absolutely awesome. The fact that Harley Quinn's leading the team because Amanda Waller died of cancer, it's a great twist, right? That's a really great idea. Lex Luthor kind of threw me off. When Lex Luthor was talking to Batman, when you're first introduced to him, and he seems kind of meek, and he has like the bass out of his voice, right, to kind of appear more docile to Batman. I thought he was just playing a gambit, right? And we go back to like the deep voice Lex Luthor, you know, and like he's just basically tricking Batman and lying to him and that kind of a thing. It's not the case, right? He's really just kind of defeated and very much a coward, but ultimately ends up being the one who is passing information to Lois Lane, who ends up sacrificing her life, you know, in order to save the day. But like there were some cool moments, right? Like this movie was absolutely stellar, right? The idea that Damian Wayne basically ends up dying when he's hit by the Omega beams, or it looked like Raven thinks he died when he was hit by the Omega beams from Darkseid. Like she loses control over keeping Trigon, you know, contained. Trigon breaks free. Constantine tries to make himself a physical body for Trigon, and then Trigon bonds himself to Superman, which looked incredible, and then crushes Darkseid. Like it was nuts. I mean, like watching Trigon fight Darkseid was amazing. It was one of the coolest things. It's like one of those stories you never get, right? It's like when we're doing Infinity Conflict, like what is it? Infinity Ending? Like the next video we do will be Thanos fighting the One Above All, and it's cool to see like those crazy situations, like those crazy matchups that you just never get to see, but you've always wanted to, right? And so you know, it was awesome to see that go down. But at the end of the day, you know, Constantine really kind of talks to Barry Allen and says, okay, you know, you have to go undo Flashpoint. You have to create a second Flashpoint to undo this timeline. And I really hope it doesn't turn into a trend where like they basically end up wiping a timeline in order to kind of start over again. But it was a great thing, right? Because all this is kind of continued after Flashpoint, and it's a great way to kind of go back through and say, okay, now we're going to tell a different set of stories, and then we'll end that timeline however it is we feel like ending that timeline. And it's a great idea, right? Because you just follow this pattern. You tell stories in a particular universe, right? You bring in the JSA, you tell their stories, maybe you give us something akin to Justice League Dark, Dark, but for the Justice Society of America. Give us like Armageddon or something along those lines. But you get some really, really cool moments, you know, out of this whole thing. But my thoughts on Justice League Dark Apokolips War, absolutely amazing. I think it's probably the best of the DC animated films, with the exception of The Dark Knight Returns, and it's certainly better than any of the live action films that Warner Brothers has made. So if I'm them, I'd focus on my animated side. I wouldn't focus on my live action side. I'd focus on the animated movies and just run with it. Just go with it. Just release them as full-length feature films, right? This movie was an hour and a half long. You add in a few more scenes, you're at 2 hours, you got a full-length feature film, albeit animated, and at the end of the day, people don't care what form the film takes, so long as it's good, right? Disney's been making animated films for 100 years. Yes, they're targeted towards kids, but at the end of the day, it works. It's a formula that works. If people like it, they will continue to see it. And that's just really kind of how this goes. So with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. I hope you guys love the movie as much as I did. If you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.